Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Cruising your way next, Off 90. We talked to a couple who were both affected by the Vietnam War in very different ways. The first use of the word robot, a celebration of all things Czech, plus Loudmouth brass. There's the exit up ahead for our next stop, Off 90. Hi, I'm Barbara Keith. Thanks for joining me on this journey, Off 90. The Nevilles had very different experiences during the Vietnam War. Debbie protested the war, while Pat served in Vietnam. After Pat returned from the war, he married Debbie. We talked with the Nevilles about their contradictory involvements during the Vietnam War.
Hi, I'm Pat Neville, and I am a retired teacher, and this is my good spouse,
Debbie Neville, and we're from Rochester, and Pat's a Vietnam vet.
I was in my first year of teaching at Spring Valley High School, and the summer after that first year, I received my draft notice.
I was a junior in high school, so he was my art teacher. And then we found out that he wouldn't be back our senior year because he was drafted. So that was a big shock because being in a relatively small town, we didn't have a lot of people that we knew personally that had been drafted. And of course, we were all very much aware that not only was he drafted into the service, but the possibility of going to Vietnam was something we were very cognizant of.
After basic, I was sent to Fort Belvoir in Virginia for my advanced training, which was generator mechanic and electrician. I had a 30-day leave and shipped out then for Vietnam.
Our art class would sit and write him letters, and so it was really a great way for us to stay in touch with him, but it was also really informational because we did get a few letters back. You know, it's one thing to see the nightly news and to read the papers and so forth, but it was also particularly important, I think, that he had a communication with his students back home. After I graduated from high school, I went to Minneapolis to go to school. And I worked at Dayton's downtown on Nicollet Mall. I had an hour lunch, and during that time there were a lot of protest marches. So I would protest during the lunch hours and sometimes afterwards, and participated in that mindset that the war is wrong. I was never against the soldiers. I was always against the war. And I think I would have felt that way anyway, but having written letters to my former teacher, you know, it really made a big difference on my attitude, and know that they're real people that weren't all in favor of the war. They just are doing their duty. I lived in Minneapolis for about a year, and then I transferred to Winona. And so I was living there when Pat got out of the service.
I got out in April. I extended 30 days in Vietnam so I'd get a 5-month early out. Coming home, there was an elation there. The pilot, we were on a Braniff airline coming home. We normally would have stopped in Japan and Anchorage to fill up and then on into San Francisco. As it was, we came straight through to San Francisco. And he got on the radio and he said, "We've had a good tailwind. We're not stopping. We're headed in." And of course, the whole plane erupted, you know, because I mean there was some excitement there. There was a group excitement, and I came back and I had a standing job as a mechanic for wards in the summertime, and so that's where I went back to work until school started in August.
But he was in Winona when I was in Winona, and he had found out that one of his ex-students was living there, so he called me up and and just wanted to catch up on what happened to the kids of his first year teaching. So that was our first date. Dating a Vietnam vet was a little weird. It was also something that wasn't always the focus, of course, of our conversations. When I told him that while he was in Vietnam, I was marching against Vietnam War in Minneapolis, he handled that pretty well, and we talked a lot about it. And it was informative from my standpoint because I wanted to know, were you for the war once you were there? How did you feel about the Vietnamese people, themselves? How did you justify being there and doing your job and so forth? So it was a major education.
I obviously was not for the war, but I also knew that I didn't have any choice when I got my draft notice. I couldn't go to Canada. It was not in my blood, but to serve my country if they needed.
The Vietnam War in our relationship to begin with was rather, we covered the base. I protested, I was against it. You served, you were against it, and then life went on for a number of years.
In Vietnam, they used Agent Orange, which is a mixture of 2 different herbicides, and they would spray the herbicide on the bushes around the base, and it would kill any vegetation, not even a blade of grass, for 300 feet around. They could sit over there in the grass 300 feet away and lob things at us, but they couldn't get up too close. That herbicide was sprayed by the helicopters in a mist, and it would float over areas depending on the wind. And so, of course, some of it came over the top of us where we were at. Our compound was right next to the wire, and it helped reduce them surprising us and overrunning us, not realizing that there might be some effects of this chemical on us later on. It has created a lot of different maladies with the Vietnam soldiers. A good friend of mine has Parkinson's, which is accredited to Agent Orange. I ended up with prostate cancer, which was taken care of efficiently. I think that some of what I have now, which is congestive heart failure and renal failure, diabetes, although that's controlled, are the effects of that. It's felt by those people that are studying that it'll take 7 generations to get rid of all of the effects of Agent Orange in our line, which I find to be unconscionable.
We're finding that there's a need for a support group for the caregivers for Vietnam vets, and we're in the process of working on that, partially for information and partially for just support, because it is something that when we found out that the government knew that the effects of Agent Orange would be potentially fatal to the soldiers, it's like, okay, what was the cost? And how many lives did it save? Because it did, clear out this particular zone, and I'm sure it saved lives that way, but at what cost continuing on, 50 years after the fact he was there? It's like, it's amazing. And that's something that both of us have to deal with, and other Vietnam vets and their caregivers as well. And it's sometimes difficult to do.
R.U.R. is the name of a play written by Czech playwright Karl Čapek. The initials R.U.R. stand for Rossum's Universal Robots. It premiered on the 25th of January, 1921, and introduced the word robot to the English language and to science fiction as a whole. Susan Hansen directed the play at the Riverland Theatre in Austin.
I'm Susan Hansen, and I'm directing RUR at Riverland Theatre. RUR, Rossum's Universal Robots, was written by Karl Čapek in 1920. RUR was very popular. It was translated into over 30 languages within 2 years. It is where the word robot was coined. Since RUR was written in 1920, Čapek had no idea of modern technology, so the robots that he created looked human as opposed to android. So it's hard to tell the difference between humans and robots. So they've discovered this way to create them. They create many, many, many of them. And the robots gain consciousness and realize that they don't really like doing the work of the humans. And there's a revolt. I did a lot of commuting last year, and while I was driving, I was listening to National Public Radio. And there were many conversations about artificial intelligence and how that has changed the human workforce, putting people out of work, making our lives easier. And that started to sink in, and this play came to my mind, and I went back and reread it, and I thought, what if this were adapted to today? Because at that point, they didn't have computers, they didn't have the idea of technology, but now we have drones, we have unmanned cars, we have all kinds of technology. There are several themes throughout the whole show, which is interesting. What is the definition of humanity? Where do we gain consciousness? What are we responsible for? How are robots being used to replace workers? The idea of the soul, the idea of creation. I've spent my life doing this. I was a professional performer for years. I spent a lot of time out in Los Angeles doing film and television commercials, things like that, and a lot of theater. I love teaching and directing, and we're always looking for interesting new projects and things that are relevant. So we pick a season in advance, and we're looking for something to do. I've been teaching at Riverland for over a dozen years, and I still, work in front of the camera, and I still direct and do other projects and things. So this has been a real joy and a huge challenge to adapt this piece, but I'm up for a challenge, so that's good. In the fall, we're never sure who's going to show up for an audition because we have new students. And I needed robots and I needed real people. And there's a slight difference between how the robots behave at the beginning and how they behave at the end. So I played around with people as far as pushing them to see how robotic, not so much mechanical. They're not metal machines, but they're not fully developed emotionally. They're not completely connected. So I did a little of that. So we had some scenes with group scenes, we had some individual scenes. There's a bit of a romance involved in the play too, so you have to kind of see who can play off each other, and would these people match up, or would this person pass as a robot? Can we believe that? So it's a matter of putting people into the place where they can best show themselves. What I like about directing is discovery. It's a process of finding the best in people. And so I do think that the actors are excited about this. It's a challenge. The director's job is to be able to see the big vision and put it all together and be the audience's eye and hopefully get that perspective. Because sometimes actors are focused on their job, you know, and designers focused on their job. So putting that whole experience together and hopefully getting the audience to feel a certain way or have a certain experience and a variety of feelings and experiences. So that's what I love about it, creating this piece that's live, and it can't be repeated the same every night, and it requires the audience to be there. They play off each other, so it's very exciting. It's a challenge. I love it.
The place known as the Brick Hall is located between Myrtle and Hayward in rural Freeborn County. It may be one of the last freestanding fraternal lodge buildings in this part of the nation. It's also the home of the Fall Czech Fest. We checked in on the festival.
It's been said that they could tell how good a time there was in the area by the amount of cars in the ditch next morning. It was all clean fun.
There's two kinds of people, Czechs and those who wish they were.
I am Evelyn Swenson. I'm a volunteer for our Czech Fest.
I'm Dennis Raymond. I'm a volunteer at the Czech Fest. There's a lot of Czechs in this area, in Minnesota. They're not all Norwegians and Germans. Bohemia is a state in Czechoslovakia.
The reason that the people from Czechoslovakia came here was because of religion. Well, they just thought that the religious people were too strict with them. They were mostly for their money. That's what Grandpa always said.
That doesn't mean they didn't believe in God. They had their own beliefs and their own ways of doing that.
My grandpa came here, and I really don't know the dates, but he was quite young.
Well, my family came over in about 1850. It was my great-great-grandfather, and he had 2 sons and his wife. Pretty soon they needed a place to congregate. They built a small hall. This hall here is the 3rd one, actually. But a lot of people came and they sold a lot of beer. That's what paid for these halls.
Well, I'm the daughter of Marie Krikova, who is the maker of most of the kolaches, but she's ill today. She's made over 1,000 for this event, and last year she made 2,000 for this event. A kolache is a Czech pastry. It has yeast dough around it and a fruit filling.
Every year we have this Czech festival to make money for our upkeep of our hall, which we are very proud of.
And also we use a good portion of that money for donations to various worthy organizations.
But we used to have all kinds of parties here when we were kids. I grew up here about a mile away, and it's we call it the Brick Hall, but the name of it is, you can see on the top there, you can see it says Síň Radu Záře Západu, which means the Hall of the Order of the Glow of the West. So my brother's here, and I got another older brother here, and a very young brother here too. So between us all, we've got a bunch of kids and grandkids, and I got 9 grandkids. So my other brothers and sisters, they got their own grandkids, and they're all here too. So it's just for us, it was 50 tickets.
And the younger ones are starting to realize their heritage is important to them. It's important to me, I know, but I think it becomes more important as I get older. We're probably one of the last few around here that still can speak much of the Czech language.
Jak se máš?
Já chlastam pivo.
I asked how you are. He's drinking beer.
Your ears will smile and your toes will tap when you hear Loudmouth Brass. With a splash of New Orleans and a pinch of pop music, Loudmouth Brass has a tasty musical recipe. We caught a live performance from Loudmouth Brass at Fox and Fern Floral in Rochester.
All right, this next one is written by our very own trombone player, Mr. Rochester Music himself, John Sievers. So it's called The Sun and the Moon.
We've reached the end of this episode's tour off 90. Thanks for riding along. See you next time, somewhere off 90.
Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.